When the papers were signed and the gavel fell, I thought I knew what rock bottom looked like. The motel receptionist proved me wrong with 7 words that shattered everything I thought I understood about my marriage. The fluorescent lights in the courthouse hallway buzzed with the persistence of a dying insect, casting harsh shadows across the marble floor where my marriage had just been legally pronounced dead. Nathaniel Morrison, age 34, divorced as of 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that felt like the end of the world. The finality of it struck me like a physical blow, not the emotional devastation I had been bracing for over the past 6 months, but something far worse: relief. That terrified me more than the papers Erica had served me with such clinical precision, more than the empty apartment that no longer felt like home, more than the prospect of starting over with nothing but a suitcase and a checking account that would barely cover first month's rent anywhere decent. The relief meant that some part of me had been suffocating in that marriage, gasping for air in a relationship that had become a performance neither of us wanted to continue. I drove through the city in a daze, watching couples walk hand in hand on sidewalks, families loading groceries into minivans, teenagers stealing kisses at bus stops. The world continued its relentless march toward happiness while I sat at red lights, gripping the steering wheel of a car that now represented half of everything I owned. When I finally pulled into the parking lot of the Riverside Motel, an establishment that had clearly seen better decades, I sat in the silence for 10 minutes, engine off, trying to summon the energy to walk inside and officially begin my new life as a divorced man. The lobby smelled of industrial disinfectant, fighting a losing battle against years of cigarette smoke and disappointment. Behind the scratched plexiglass partition sat a woman in her early 30s, with tired eyes and prematurely gray streaks threading through her auburn hair. She looked up from a paperback novel as I approached, and something in her expression suggested she had seen this particular brand of devastation before. "Room for the night?" she asked, her voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone accustomed to not asking questions. "Maybe longer," I admitted, sliding my credit card across the counter. "I just finalized my divorce today." She processed this information without the awkward sympathy I had been dreading. Instead, she pulled a room key from the board behind her and paused, studying my face with an intensity that made me wonder what she saw there. "Some endings don't mean failure," she said quietly, placing the key in my palm. "Sometimes they just mean you stop lying to yourself." The words hit me with the force of a confession I hadn't realized I needed to make. I stood there, key growing warm in my hand, staring at the stranger who had somehow articulated the truth I had been running from for months. I managed a nod, muttered something about being in room 12, and walked away before the weight of her observation could crush me entirely. The room was exactly what $39 per night would buy: a bed that had witnessed too many stories like mine, a television that picked up 4 channels on clear days, and a window that faced the dumpster behind a Chinese restaurant. I sat on the edge of the mattress and finally allowed myself to think about how I had arrived here, not just geographically, but existentially. Erica had been systematic in her departure from our marriage. What I had initially dismissed as a rough patch, the kind every couple weathers, had actually been her methodical withdrawal from the life we had built together. The signs had been there, glaring in retrospect, but I had chosen to interpret them as temporary turbulence rather than a fundamental shift in the trajectory of our relationship. It began with the Friday nights. Erica announced her intention to reclaim her independence through regular outings with girlfriends, a perfectly reasonable request that became something else entirely when combined with the wardrobe changes, the heavier perfume, the way she returned home with stories that never quite added up. When I voiced my concerns, she accused me of being controlling, of trying to diminish her into something smaller than she was meant to be. "If you put half the energy into making something of yourself that you put into monitoring my social calendar," she had said during one particularly brutal argument, "maybe we wouldn't be living such an aggressively ordinary life." Ordinary. The word became a weapon she wielded with surgical precision. My steady job in accounting, ordinary. Our comfortable 3-bedroom house in a neighborhood with good schools, ordinary. The vacation we took every summer to the same lake house, ordinary. My dreams of starting a family, building something lasting, creating a legacy of love and stability, all of it dismissed as the small ambitions of a small man. The cruelest part was how she made me complicit in my own diminishment. Every time I tried to defend our life, our choices, our quiet happiness, she painted it as evidence of my limited imagination. I began to second-guess every decision, every moment of contentment, wondering if she was right, if I was somehow failing her by being satisfied with what we had rather than constantly reaching for something more. The divorce proceedings moved with brutal efficiency. Erica had consulted attorneys months before she served me with papers, had already begun the process of untangling our shared life, while I was still believing we were working through temporary difficulties. She wanted the house, she explained with the calm rationality of someone who had already worked through every angle, because it represented her investment in our future, even if that future no longer included me. My lawyer wanted to fight. We could force a sale, he argued, divide the assets equally, make her buy out my half. But sitting in his office, surrounded by law books and the accumulated wisdom of dissolved marriages, I realized I had no desire to battle over the physical remnants of a love that had already died. If Erica wanted the house, she could have it. I would take my car, my retirement savings, and whatever dignity I could salvage from the wreckage. The 2 weeks I spent at the Riverside Motel became an unexpected education in solitude. The receptionist, whose name, I learned, was Margaret, worked the evening shift and seemed to understand the particular brand of quiet that divorce requires. She never pushed for conversation, never offered unsolicited advice, but her presence became a strange comfort during those first raw days of adjustment. "Most people who stay here are running from something," she told me one evening as I sat on the bench outside my room, watching cars pass on the highway. "But you look like someone who's trying to figure out what he's running toward." She was right, of course. The initial shock of divorce had given way to something more complex. Not just grief for what I had lost, but curiosity about who I might become without Erica's voice in my head, constantly measuring my life against her expanding expectations. Margaret had her own story, I learned gradually. A divorce several years earlier, followed by a series of relationships that taught her to value independence over the illusion of security that comes from settling for less than you deserve. She worked nights at the motel to pay for nursing school, determined to build a career that would allow her to help people in ways that mattered. "The thing about rock bottom," she said during one of our evening conversations, "is that it gives you a solid foundation to build on. Most people are so afraid of falling that they never learn how strong they actually are." When I finally found an apartment and prepared to leave the motel, Margaret and I had developed something that felt precious in its simplicity, a friendship built on mutual respect and shared understanding of what it means to start over. We began meeting for coffee on Sunday mornings, talking about books, about dreams deferred and rediscovered, about the strange gift of being forced to examine your life without the familiar reference points you thought defined you. I was careful not to rush into anything romantic. The warmth of genuine companionship after months of emotional winter was intoxicating, but I had learned the difference between gratitude and love, between healing and dependency. Margaret deserved better than to be someone's rebound, and I deserved the time to rediscover who Nathaniel Morrison was when he wasn't trying to live up to someone else's vision of success. The truth about Erica's deception emerged almost a year later, delivered casually by a mutual friend over lunch. The girl's nights had been cover for an affair that began months before she served me with divorce papers. She had been auditioning her replacement life while I was still fighting to save our marriage, test-driving a future with someone she believed could offer her the excitement and status she felt our relationship lacked. The betrayal should have devastated me. Instead, it provided a strange sense of completion, the final piece of a puzzle that had never quite made sense. Erica hadn't left because we had grown apart or because love had simply faded. She had left because she had found what she believed was a better option, and had lacked the courage to end our marriage before beginning her next chapter. The affair, I learned, had not provided the fairy tale ending she had orchestrated. Her lover proved to be as commitment-phobic as he was charming, stringing her along with promises that evaporated the moment she began pushing for something permanent. When it ended badly, as relationships built on deception often do, she found herself alone in the house she had fought so hard to keep, a house that now represented not victory, but the hollow prize of a game she had won by cheating. I felt no satisfaction in her disappointment, no vindication in her discovery that the grass was not greener in someone else's bed. By the time I learned the full scope of her betrayal, I had already forgiven her, not because she deserved it, but because carrying anger was exhausting, and I had better ways to spend my energy. Therapy helped me understand that forgiveness was not about excusing Erica's choices, but about refusing to let those choices continue to define my story. Week after week, I unpacked the ways I had made myself small to accommodate her expanding dissatisfaction, the ways I had apologized for being exactly the kind of man she had once claimed to want: stable, loyal, committed to building something lasting. Today, I live in a one-bedroom apartment that overlooks a park where children play, and couples walk dogs, and teenagers learn to drive in the empty parking lot on Sunday mornings. It is a good life, not the life I had planned, but one that fits me in ways my marriage never did. I have learned to cook meals for one without feeling lonely, to make decisions based on my own values rather than someone else's expectations, to find joy in the simple pleasure of being authentically myself. Margaret and I continue to meet for coffee, our friendship having evolved into something deeper and more sustainable than the desperate gratitude of two wounded people finding shelter in each other's company. We talk about the future now, not with the frantic urgency of people trying to outrun their past, but with the quiet confidence of individuals who have learned to trust their own judgment. I may marry again someday, but only if I find someone who sees clearly who I am and chooses to love that person rather than trying to reshape him into someone else. I will not settle for being tolerated, managed, or gradually diminished in the name of compromise. The stranger at the motel reception desk was right. Some endings are not failures. Sometimes they are simply the beginning of telling yourself the truth.